First off, Mrs. Henderson, thank you very much for being here tonight with us. Almost 50 years ago, Milton Friedman famously stated that the sole responsibility of a company is to increase its profits. Now, Friedman's legacy has been of great influence on many things over the last 50 years. Yet, also many seem to question its legitimacy to solve the problems we face today. Could you please state what is the legacy of Mr. Friedman?
Professor Friedman left a strong legacy. In the minds of many business people, particularly in the US and the UK, there remains the residual belief that the only duty of business is to maximize shareholder value. I believe in the current moment that's a mistaken belief and inconsistent with Professor Friedman's core beliefs, but it remains as a kind of taken for granted assumption in many boardrooms, for many investors, and to my mind, in very negative ways.
Now, these taken for granted assumptions, I think this is the one that you mentioned right now is one of many which are there, and part of the reimagining that we're trying to do here during this series is trying to reimagine and these assumptions that we hold as well. Well, before diving into the details of Mr. Friedman's legacy and what's wrong about it, what we can do about it, let me just first start off with the devil's advocate question. What did Milton Friedman 50 years ago get right about capitalism that appealed so much to people back then?
He suggested that free and fair markets are an incredible instrument for the generation of prosperity and freedom. And I must say, I completely believe him. I think genuinely free and fair markets are one of the great inventions of the human race. That there's nothing like having a whole bunch of entrepreneurs to compete to bring the products and services that people need to people who need them. What he, and you know, I want to go to where he went wrong, but I think the underlying idea that a market where people own their own assets, where they're not beholden to the state, gives people both prosperity and freedom. The freedom to work for whom they want and the freedom to be independent from the state. And both of those are fabulous features of capitalism.
Yeah. Now, this freedom that you mentioned, it is often said that a capitalist society, maybe in the style that Mr. Friedman envisions, is a necessity in order for this freedom to flourish. Do you agree with that?
I think a society in which the state owns all the means of production is going to have a much harder time supporting individual freedom. And I think the historical examples bear that out. Yes, I do.
Yeah. So, Mr. Friedman's legacy has been of a large influence on many things, as we stated. What do you think that is part of this that we should address of his legacy? What part should we address? Which is the most imminent part that we should address right now?
The piece that worries me most, that I think is most important, is that Friedman essentially said, your duty is to maximize profits at any cost. I'm going to turn off my video, I think, but I'm going to turn off my video so my audio is better. Friedman says, maximize profits at any cost, but there should be an asterisk on that. If, for example, one of the easiest ways to maximize profit is to change the rules of the game, to flood the political system with money, to enable you to continue making profits, that's not what Mr. Friedman meant. If one great way to make money is to pour literally billions of dollars, billions of tons of carbon dioxide out of the window for free, that's a great way to make money if you're a fossil fuel company, but it's destroying the environment. So markets only work their magic when they are genuinely free and fair, when the rules of the game are set by a transparent, effective, accountable democracy, and when externalities like global warming are properly priced. When those two things are not the case, then capitalism, just focusing on shareholder value, can be a disaster. And I think that's the moment we're in now.
That's very clear. Now, one of the topics that we are going to discuss tonight, and on which you both and Mr. Meyer seem to elaborate a little bit more, is the topic of purpose. Purpose seems to be paramount in order for business to change, in order to face these externalities that you mentioned just yet. Before we start that discussion, could you just lay out what purpose is and what purpose is in a business context?
For a company to have a purpose is to be authentically committed to some goal beyond profit maximization, ideally a pro-social goal. So, for example, in the case of Aetna, a US insurance company, the company was committed to trying to really make a difference in patients' lives, really improving the health of its clients, as opposed to simply maximizing the bottom line. And such a purpose is important because when push comes to shove, it shapes the investments that a firm makes. It shapes the way it treats people. So for me, an authentically purpose-driven company is one that operates a high-road employment system that treats people with dignity and respect, that gives them decent wages and decent benefits, and that gives them the tools and the freedom they need to get the job done, to get the purpose done. So a purpose-driven company is both how you manage people and having a much broader goal of the purpose of the firm in the world.
Yes.
And to be really authentic, the firm has to spend money on its purpose. So there have to be moments when the firm says, no, we're going to do this because it's in accord with our purpose, even though in the short term we will lose returns.
So in your book, you also discuss the distinction between high road firms and low road firms. What do you mean by that and regarding this discussion of purpose that we're talking about?
Well, we've known for at least 100 years that there is a different way to manage people. And the Economist recently learned just 15 years ago that in every industry, the top 10% of firms are on average more than twice as productive as the bottom 10% of firms. And that's not a function of the quality of the capital that goes in. It's not a function of the training of the employees. I spent 15 years in windowless conference rooms trying to make that result go away. And the answer is a major part of that difference is driven by how people manage. That running a firm that really encourages intrinsic motivation so that running a firm in ways that encourage people to be intrinsically connected to what they're doing, giving them decent wages, decent benefits, a real purpose is a way to unlock enormous amounts of productivity and creativity. And David, I can hear you thinking, well, I think I can hear you thinking, if this is such a great idea, how come all firms aren't managed this way? And there are at least two answers. One is it requires much more energy and attention. And the second, because you need to make a serious commitment to managing this way. If you're just focused on short-term results, if you don't understand the importance of really investing in purpose for the long term, it's easy to default to the low road. Just pay people the money and manage by the numbers and treat them as things. And so for me, what's so exciting about purpose is that it really pushes firms towards managing in a high road way.
Now, if I listen to you correctly, you emphasize this element of authenticity as well within a purpose-driven organization. So it's something that should come from within. Do you think that we can count on businesses to self-regulate with regard to this purpose, or do you think it should be enforced on businesses in some way?
Oh, I don't think purpose can save the world. I don't think purpose-driven firms can save the world. I think they might help. If we're going to reimagine capitalism, to rebuild markets so they're genuinely free and fair, and that we pay attention to the environment and to our societies, and we run firms as if both were really important, we're going to need fundamental changes in regulation and in taxation. We're going to need to rethink government and how it regulates business. I believe purpose-driven firms are important because at the moment, most governments don't look as though they're going to do that. And I think purpose-driven firms can have a catalytic effect on the firms around them in ways that encourage them to really move in this direction. So purpose-driven firms can exploit business models that let firms solve major social problems and treat their employees better. As they do that, they find out that, whoa, individual firms are not enough, that they must join together in self-regulatory arrangements like those in food, where the big food companies came together to say, look, we have to stop deforestation. And they focused on beef and soy and palm oil and timber, the world's big agricultural commodities. And working together, they really made a difference in deforestation, particularly in the Amazon. But those kinds of self-regulatory arrangements, they're really important. They make a lot of progress. Will they get us where we need to go? No. But they lay the foundation for two really important changes. One is in how we think about finance, and the other is the way in which we think about the relationship between business and government. And if we can drive all four of those changes, that might reimagine capitalism.
I'm glad you started about finance, Ms. Henderson, because you might say that one of the contexts in which this discussion is also currently living up is, of course, one of the aspects of modern day capitalism is financialization and increasing influence of financial firms on business decisions. Now, you could say that financial markets are inherently short-term oriented. Yeah, so how do we square this short-term orientedness of financial market with these long-term practices that we need within business?
I don't think financial markets are inherently short-term oriented. I think the problem with the financial markets is they're looking for an 8% rate of return. The financial markets funded Amazon. They fund the major pharmaceutical companies, which spend billions of dollars on long-term research, which won't pay off for literally 10 or 15 years. If you can persuade investors that what you're doing makes sense, and you have the metrics and you have the track record, you can focus on the longer term. The reason financial markets look short-term oriented and are experienced by many CEOs as such, and I have 25 years of corporate board experience, so I understand this, is that the investors think you must make your quarterly returns. Why? To show that the firm is under control. So if you just give vague plans for the future and you don't have good metrics, the investors won't support you. So one way to make the markets much more focused on the long term is better metrics. That's why ESG metrics and impact metrics, environmental, social, and governance and measures of impact are so important, because they can support a changed conversation between firms and investors that will focus everyone on the long term.
Thank you so much, Ms. Henderson. We'll come back to that, especially the ESG ratings as well. Looking forward to going in depth in a few more minutes.